making this webinar available. We will be breaking it up into different segments. We will be creating a little bit of a guide, and we certainly want to learn from, by the end of this, is what you'd like next from us as well. So please put that in the chat or contact the GSA directly if that's your preference. For now, we're going to move into a panel. And I really would like you to carry on putting your observations or your questions in the chat so we can address those for you. If you prefer to put a digital hand up, please feel free to do so. Turn your video on, and we'll try and bring you into the conversation. But we're really preferencing questions rather than lengthy sort of like opinions from the floor, if we don't mind. Right, I'd now like to hand over to the chair of our panel, David Jones, who is GSA council member and founder of Clausify. David, if you'd like to very briefly introduce yourself first, and then we'll move into the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Kerry. And hi, everyone. Some of you I've met before, so familiar faces, so hello to you all. And for those who don't know me, I'm a lawyer by trade, but also founder and director of Clausify, which is a business-to-business contracting platform that leverages the GSA standard terms and conditions. So if you've not had a look, please do. I think it segues quite nicely in some of the conversations on AI, which we'll come on to a bit later on. Fantastic keynote presentations, I thought. Suresh, I was fascinated by the different levels of AI, the degree to which the human's in the loop and the human's not, and the cost savings really start to sort of add up when you step back quite a lot as the human and allow the machine to do a lot of the work, which of course then leads on to some of the points that you raised down in your session around systemic risk. I thought it was a really good point there around that single point of failure. We've seen that with some other IT issues of late, where there's been, you can almost spot the IT infrastructure that some companies are using by the names that go down, you know, are that they're with X and they're with Y. So I think that's very interesting, that kind of single point of failure and the need for that contractual flexibility. And then Caroline, the IP issue, you know, the background IP, everyone thinks about the newly created IP, you know, this machine's creating it, who's the author, is it the machine, is it the commissioning customer? But of course, the background data that's being collected as well, I think people don't give that enough thought as to whether a customer is potentially surrendering the use of their own background data as well, that background IP. So fascinating. And I think ultimately the idea of the kill switch is what I really took away from it, the idea that ultimately a termination right, whether it's partial with respect to a particular tool's use or adoption, or indeed more broadly across the relationship with the supplier itself, is a useful thing, and liability is sort of a murky issue. So lots there. Those are just sort of my very high level thoughts to sort of summarize a bit. We had some questions. I think some of them were addressed quite nicely in those presentations. But agentic AI, I don't know if we took a deep dive on that and the use of agentic AI. I don't know if anyone, Caroline, Dan, don't know if either of you has any thoughts on the use of agentic AI and any particular perspectives on that.
Sure, I'm happy to take a stab. Yeah, I mean, it's something that certainly we're getting more questions from buy side. I mean, just generally from organizations that are thinking about the risks of using agentic AI. And I think for buy side governance, it's probably updating, you know, thinking about updates that you might need to make to standard terms that you've already produced for AI. And Caroline's already mentioned how I think we're sort of into almost like a second wave of thinking around the standard terms and conditions on the buy side that may be presented to suppliers, in the sense that, you know, I think there are some fairly robust terms, and you still see fairly robust terms in the market, and I still think it's a bit of a nascent space, but there's probably been some change as customers and buyers have got to understand their own risk appetite better and how AI works within their organization, and have, you know, governance models that have changed, so have their standard terms and conditions. And I think agentic AI is another thing that triggers a revisit of those standard terms and conditions. I think one of the areas that is of particular, I mean, it increases the questions around responsibility. So and that really depends on who's setting the agent up, and then what kind of data the agent is using. So that's one area that is a topic that we often get into discussion about. And then the other one I think that is at the forefront of lots of people's mind is the kind of cybersecurity risk, and the fact that the agent, and understanding what the agent is doing, and thinking about security and access, because it could go across, you know, across multiple applications in your IT infrastructure. And so having a really good understanding of what it's going to be able to access, having your security set right so that it isn't accessing things that it shouldn't do, and that you've got that security risk locked down. And then as Caroline's already alluded to, there is a focus on auditability, traceability, being able to see what an agent has done, understand the steps that it has taken, and then you can look back. I mean, some agents should be able to do that for you. So they'll be able to tell you, you know, I don't know, I got a service ticket, incident came in, I triaged it, I understood that this was the issue, I retrieved this fix from the, you know, database that I'm supposed to be calling on, I implemented the fix, I tested it to make sure and validated to make sure the fix had worked and has solved the error, and then I package up a report that gets pushed out to someone that is there as a record of all the steps that the agent has taken, so that you can kind of make sure that the agent is behaving in the way that you expect. Those are some thoughts.
Perfect, thank you. Anything to add, Caroline, or was that pretty much touch it all from your perspective as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the governance side of things is certainly the thing that is key from my perspective. But yeah, Dan's kind of touched on everything.
Excellent, great, thank you. And then there's another question which actually segues quite nicely into a question that Jant's posed in the chat here, which is around preparing for staff and repurposing. And one of the questions that sort of leads on to that is, with all the risks that have just been highlighted, will customers think about in-housing their service model instead of outsourcing it to get better control? So I'll sort of link those two questions together, because to me it sort of forms the perspective of how do you accommodate it in an in-house basis, and how can you get the best out of it if you were going to in-house it. And I think a lot of that, I'll start with some thoughts and then welcome all three or anyone else to pile in with additional thoughts. Is I think a lot of jobs are going to change fundamentally in their nature. I think jobs that previously were very human-led will potentially become still human-led, but that human activity will be being a master of prompts. So having a really good way of asking machines how to do things, a very standardized and clear way of asking machines for particular outputs. I think humans will need to move up the value chain. I think any task that a human's currently employed on that is repetitive, systematic and logical probably is a high risk for AI. And so it's the idea, I think, for many people to think about, how do I move into the grey space that isn't so easily machinable, to use a terrible word I've just created, but some way of creating a high level of human judgment and discretion that operates in the grey area. I would say that's where staff need to be focusing their attentions, because the stuff that is formulaic, systematic and follows a repeatable, scalable logic is probably ripe for AI. But Dan, Caroline, I don't know if you have any additions to that line of thought.
I mean, it is a big sort of societal issue, and I'm not sure that I am completely equipped to answer that question, but it is something that obviously, you know, in the kind of sector that we work in, when you're thinking about outsourcing and this very innovative technology that can transform the way that traditional services have been delivered, it obviously is something that we are constantly kind of aware of and seeing as part of the day-to-day kind of job that we're doing in our own different sort of specialisms. Me obviously as a external legal advisor. I suppose what I would say on the idea about whether or not to in-house to retain control, I mean, it is a good question, and that I suppose it's part of, is that an AI specific question, or is that still just a question when you're thinking about outsourcing anything about your capability? And do you have the in-house capability to use AI tools effectively? Do you have the right people in your organization who can do that? But do you have people that could build an AI system, for example? And if you don't, then I guess you've got the choice of you're weighing up whether it's control over going at, getting someone with those expertise. And if it's control, I suppose you're building maybe a team in-house, or you're asking someone to develop you a tool that you will own and use in-house, versus handing that over to someone who may already have a team and technology and expertise to do that for you. There is obviously a related point there about making sure that, thinking about equipping your existing employees in a way that they are AI literate, and that they are maximizing these tools that do get introduced, if you're introducing them in-house. Because I know that there's lots of people looking at tools that are out there in the market and using them, but how are you actually using them in a way that achieves all the benefits and promise that they could bring? But again, it's quite a big topic, but those are my thoughts on it.
And I was just going to add, oh, sorry, Sarah, go on. You've got your hand up.
Oh, please go ahead. That's okay.
I agree. I mean, it's a huge topic, isn't it? And it's something which I have some clients who sort of like to joke that my job will be replaced by AI at some stage, and like to draft their own contracts using ChatGPT and then send them through for review. And I think I don't think we're quite redundant yet, but I think I do think the upskilling is crucial. And I think a lot of organisations are investing, including my own firm, in investing a lot of time and resource in upskilling staff, engaging the right people that can help. It's not just a case of what the services that we offer, it's what we are also using, and making sure that you are essentially benefiting from AI in the right way. Clients are expecting us to use AI, so it's the balance of being replaceable, and that's there's employment consequences of that, and I'm not an employment lawyer, so I won't even touch on those. So being potentially replaceable, but then actually also using it to complement what you're doing. And I think our clients certainly, and I'm sure others are the same, they are expecting us to use it, and they are, they require it. They want to know, and they want to reap the benefits of it as well. They want to get the efficiencies, and they want to, see it pricing reduced, all those sorts of things where we are adopting AI solutions. And actually clients are asking us, where you have, internal developers and in-house teams, actually to think about, well, what tools could you develop for us to actually make your legal advice to us and what you're doing, and help us be more efficient. So I think it's an interesting area, I think, but I think it's actually also something which there's quite creative solutions, which certainly, obviously at law firm it's quite different, but I think clients it's a conversation that clients want to have. So I think, but like I say, hopefully not redundant yet.
Suresh, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I'm just going to add that there's no clear, we do a lot of sourcing strategies. So this is one of the things that we explore during the strategy. What are the best towers or processes that has the most propensity for outsourcing? So to Dan's point, I don't think AI has become a new criteria to whether or not a client would insource. The criteria is still very much the same. For example, I mentioned about very high value.
Again, just concerned that I'm trying to send you a message and it won't let me send one. It keeps sending it as a WhatsApp message.
Okay, so yeah, what I was just going to say is, for example, I mentioned about the high value claims processing. That client is very clear, AI or not, this is not a process that we will outsource. But at the same time, they're heavily outsourced, and the commoditized claims processing, IT infrastructure, fully outsourced. I don't see any client that's taking in IT infrastructure sourcing, workplace services, service desk, especially if you're already outsourced and nobody's taking it back. We don't see that happening because of AI. If anything at all, they are sort of consolidating the positions on sourcing, because providers are better equipped, because this is their business, right? They're in the business of adopting new technology. The clients are not. But having said that, there are some clients who are experimenting, especially on application development, where there's closeness with the business. You need to be co-located with the business. So there we do see that some clients are experimenting, AI, but then this is not a new criteria.
Hello, Chris. You're on mute.
I am on mute. I'm now off. Hi, everyone. Caroline, there was something that you mentioned in your wonderful keynote I loved it, and the other ones as well. So well done, everyone. But you mentioned something about a kill switch, and I remember looking at all of the operational resilience standards that came out, and the requirement to ensure, particularly in the financial services world, that if things went wrong, there was kind of backup after backup after backup. And it just put me in mind that that was the same sort of area. And what are you seeing in terms of people expecting that they can ask a supplier to essentially stop using that and use something else? So essentially, go back to some sort of, manual process, if you like.
Yeah, I think, thank you. I think we are seeing customers, particularly where, again, so let's take a client of mine that's in the financial services sector. So they are obviously heavily regulated, and there's a lot more to their contracts than a lot of other organizations in different industries. But I think they are, and not just, this is not, again, new necessarily for AI, right? This is actually just the landscape of the regulations they're governed by. So
Yeah.
I think they require involvement in understanding security standards, but also security testing, and they require rights to security test, and to go in, and suppliers don't like that, but that's what they require, that or regulator, and or where it's required by a regulator. So it's like you say, if we go in, we find something we don't like, or there's a breach, or there's an issue, or there's a failure somewhere, and we don't like it, and there's a risk to us for our own compliance regime, that invokes a change in the contract. And then it comes down to you can't force a supplier to change something, but that is when you need that backup right to be able to terminate. But we absolutely see it. It's not just it's involvement in setting the security standards, testing the security standards, understanding what the BCP looks like, going in and testing it, getting reports, getting all of their SOC 2, everything, deliverables annually and on request, updating information security questionnaires. So it's a slightly relentless audit. Essentially, it's not just an annual audit. It's a repeat audit over everything, and being involved in so many different stages. And when it comes to things like backups and insisting that things are changed, we see it, like I say, it's something that can be proposed. It's not even an agreement to agree something. It's we want you to change something. If the supplier says no, you lose the customer, and that's a commercial call for them. One thing which actually a client raised, which was a very interesting question, it's okay, well, what happens down the line, right? So what happens if the backup of the backup of the backup fails? Who's responsible? And that's something that we're exploring with them, to actually look through that chain to understand how can we mitigate these risks contractually for you, and also technically. That's what the teams obviously need to do. But absolutely, we see it, Chris. It's I think it's customers, and that, like I say, that's very specific to the financial services sector. But there are other customers and clients of ours who have particularly comprehensive policies themselves, and they require it of their suppliers. So it's part of the process of onboarding. If you want to be a supplier to X, you will meet all of these standards, and you'll ensure we can come in and make sure you're meeting those standards. And if you're not meeting them, this is what will happen. And if it's a risk of a loss of a contract, and it's a huge contract, it's something a supplier would take pretty seriously. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Oh, there's about a million other questions that fly from that one, but yeah, thank you very much.
No
Oh, David, just one other comment, which I stuck in the chat, and which, I mean, Kerry and I we've been doing this sort of stuff for about 100 years, and the thing that we keep coming back to with outsourcing is governance, and it occurs to me that governance now becomes a huge issue. It was always a huge issue. It's just that maybe we were able to ignore it a little bit sometimes. But surely AI provides us with a capability to kind of turbocharge governance, activities, reporting, blah, 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 record keeping, all the rest of it. So, David, I'll just throw that one in there.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. And I think people sometimes get a bit carried away with AI and think the usual rules don't apply because it's AI, it must be right. But I think, exactly to your point, the same questions need to be asked of for an organization, what is our core point of differentiation? What is our USP? Because the closer you get to that, the more unwilling and the more cautious any organization should be about outsourcing it to anyone, whether it's AI or any other force. And I think it touched on a point Suresh made in his presentation around, you might have a certain value threshold where you're a bit more relaxed about having a huge degree of dependency on AI. And there might be some stuff that gets more higher value or nearer to the sort of tip of the spear in terms of your unique service offering, where you say, no, absolutely, we don't want that to just become the common denominator that every organization's using. That is our business. We cannot just rely on AI. So I think it's that constant appraisal, isn't it, of what's our degree of comfort, let's try it, and if it works, maybe we take a step up, but start at the bottom rather than going all in on AI, thinking it's the solution to every problem that exists. And I think this touches then quite nicely upon another question, which is around how we ensure from a psychological safety perspective that AI isn't just standardizing, but gives parties trust. And I think that was one of the questions that was submitted before. And I think that is the point, the standardization. AI is basically a huge aggregator that scours all kinds of different references and then gives an answer that's within sort of the mean based on that huge data set. And sometimes the answer you want isn't the average or the mean. It is something quite unique and different that hasn't been done before. So I think that's worth keeping in mind. And I like to think about, in this point, Caroline, that you made around some customers some of your clients sending you AI generated contracts. I'm really suspicious about that myself. I mean, some of you may say, well, you would say that you have a business that works around standard contracts. And I do genuinely think standard contracts are a better approach, because if you think about, okay, so I can get AI to generate me a contract and send it across. The person who receives that document, how is that helpful to them? They don't know what prompt I've given AI to write that contract. They don't know it's balanced. They don't know it makes sense. They don't know it's legally enforceable. All it is entrenching the current system of backwards and forwards reinvention of the wheel, but enabling that first creation of a document to be done more quickly and cheaply. But all the problems are still there. There's no guarantee it's fair or balanced. There's no assumed learning that you have with a standard where you can say, I know the position is X because I've seen this many times before. It's still creating something from scratch that doesn't really, I think, present huge savings. The only way I think you'd probably go about doing that would be if both the buyer and seller were sat in a room together, prompting the machine and looking at the output as it appears on screen and iterating it together, which, query whether that's actually a huge time saving and benefit. So I think in terms of the legal generation of documents, and we've all seen cases where submissions have been made to court, where case law has been made up, and judges have come down very hard on some of the lawyers saying, this is outrageous, you can't make up case law in your submissions. So I think we're still a long way from being able to say we can trust completely AI, and that human in the loop is absolutely a key part of all of that. Another question that came through was, is there going to be, what steps are successful organizations taking in terms of diversification and avoiding that single point of failure, Dan, that you mentioned? What are organizations doing? I think in the current geopolitical climate, this is a real concern, right? I'm seeing things like sovereign cloud being quite a thing now, whereas 5 years ago that wasn't really talked about. But now organizations, the big hyperscalers, most of them, if not all of them, have, for example, European sovereign cloud to deal with concerns around data protection and data residency and sovereignty and things like that. Are there any other things, Daniel, Suresh, Caroline, any of you are seeing around steps that organizations are taking to diversify their risk and to make sure that they avoid this single point of failure that we talked about?
I mean, I suppose, I mean, I've already kind of alluded to some of the things that we've seen people doing in terms of tracking their understanding where they might have single points of failure, where they're becoming quite dependent on a small group of models. And I suppose how you then deal with that is a question that then you need to sort of grapple with, which is, but there is an inherent issue there, I suppose, in the sense that if you have a core group of providers and a lot of them are situated in certain territories, jurisdictions, etc., do you have viable alternatives? And that is obviously a big, geopolitical kind of governmental question that is being looked at. The UK are thinking about that. The European Union is thinking about that. yeah, so I think it's something that customers that we deal with are thinking about. But it's also a bigger, beyond them managing their own concentration risk. I think there is a bigger issue there, perhaps.
Caroline, Suresh, anything to add on that?
Go on, Suresh. I feel like I've been chattering.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I think beyond what Dan has said, I don't think, again, I don't think AI is causing any additional single points of failure. So the risks that were there previously is still there. But as you said, cloud sovereignty is something, that due to the geopolitical risk, European companies are definitely something thinking about. But at the same time, the jury is out in terms of how sovereign you will be if the hyperscaler is headquartered somewhere else in another country. So there's a lot of talk about de-risking from the single point of failure, but I don't think there's a silver bullet to solve this problem other than the traditional ones like reducing concentration risk and disaster recovery sites, etc.
Yeah, I agree.
Excellent. And then another question, it's a bit of a broad one, a bit of a kind of random one. How does the panel think that AI will shape the travel industry? Some of the particular interest there, but I think there's probably two parts to that. There's sort of the operational side of things. I'm thinking planes and logistics and timings and scheduling and all that sort of stuff, and then also the sort of commercial aspects of it for businesses.
Yeah, if I can just take that part. So first of all, the general impact that agentic and AI is going to have on all businesses will affect the travel and tourism industry as well. But I think the biggest shift that we're going to see, we're probably already seeing in the travel industry, is empowering the consumer to use this technology to come up with their own schedule of create a travel plan. For example, agentic can look into your Outlook calendar, can look into your leaves and all kinds of things and come up with a plan. You can actually come up with a plan as an individual. I don't have to go to a tourism company, travel company to say that I need a 5-day trip in the Seychelles and these are the activities I want to do. Agentic will, within seconds, within minutes, it can give me options of flights. These are the dates, the hotel accommodation, this is my budget. Everything can be done. So what hitherto would have been done by travel agents, etc., you can just literally do that within minutes. I mean, earlier people did. I've done many trips arranged myself, but then you'd have to go through several hundreds of sites. We all know that, sitting late night and going, all of that will be done by agentic for us, as long as you put in the constraints. So I think this is a big, empowerment of the consumer and democratizing this entire thing. It's going to change the way, travel and tourism works, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. Dan,
I also,
anything?
sorry, I was also just going to add, I think it'll actually be interesting to see how the interplay of more use of AI within the travel industry, so whether it's supply chain or operations or those sorts of things, actually has an impact on its sustainability and those elements and its reporting and getting to carbon neutral, all those things, which actually I don't necessarily think that's not the forefront of your mind when you think about that, but actually it's a really good example when you're talking about the travel industry. And actually that is something, again, a client of ours, they are looking at those sorts of efficiencies as part of their sustainability planning. So yeah, and it's another thing that you wouldn't necessarily naturally think of, but it just shows how it's so integrated in so many things. But I think it will have a huge impact. Not least, it'll make planning travel much easier, which would be nice.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Kerry, we've got 4 minutes. I don't know if you want to open up for any more questions from the table, from other people, participants, or if you want to wrap up a little bit earlier. I don't. Anyone else have any questions? You're on mute, Kerry.
Yeah, I think we're actually bang on time, so thank you very much. Yeah, so in terms of a little bit of a wrap up, I've put it in the chat. The GSA is a founding member of the Global Technology and Business Services Council, which is an alliance of industry associations all around the world. Obviously, a lot of those are delivery destinations. It includes India, Malaysia, South Africa, Egypt, Central and Eastern Europe, as well as LATAM, as well as the United States. So we come together, and in fact, it's my very next meeting today at 12 o'clock to actually discuss what we need to do globally. And the next thing we're doing is an event on February the 24th, online, 2 p.m, which is really looking at discussing how our roles are changing and what do we need to do to upskill our people, because we cannot let swathes of our working population be left at the wayside. We need to make sure that we bring them with us on this journey and upskill them. So I know that came up in the conversation, and it is something that we are digging down on. I'm going to follow this up with a quick questionnaire as well, just to find out what you'd like from the GSA next. Do we want to create this into a bit of a working group where we carry on discussing this more with our sleeves up, round table kind of discussion? Do we want to look at the GSA perhaps developing together industry standard pre-contractual questionnaires around third-party models? Or do we want to share standard AI T's and C's around third-party foundation models, which is some of the things I've picked up from the conversations we were having, just to see what the GSA can do to help simplify this minefield as we continue to move forward at rapid pace. So I will send that to all the participants. But for now, it just leaves me to say a massive thank you to all of our speakers. You all did a fantastic job. So Suresh from ISG, absolutely bang on with how this is changing. It's mind-bending to think that it's going to be like less than 50% of the unit price by the end of this year, and how that's all, the ramifications of all of that. Dan and Caroline, your views on what you're actually negotiating and all the things people need to be thinking about were really inspiring, really insightful. So thank you very much for the full share that you did. That was really open and transparent and generous of you to share so much intel. So we do really appreciate that. And David, thank you very much for chairing the panel. So we appreciate all your time. We appreciate all of your time for joining us. And let's keep this conversation going, because there's a lot to be discussed and a lot to be worked out throughout 2026. So without further ado, I will say goodbye. Thank you.